Hi guys, welcome to today's session, and today we are going to discuss about small finance banks. And in this session we'll first discuss a background about small finance banks, and then we'll discuss in detail about small finance banks, and then we'll discuss the criteria for setting up small finance banks, and then we'll discuss what are the regulations that is what are the do's and don'ts of SFB, and what are the challenges of small finance banks. And finally we'll discuss another similar type of bank, payment banks. We'll discuss few points about payment banks also. So this is how I plan this session. Let's now start. So friends, the small finance banks and payment banks comes under the category of differentiated banks. And differentiated banks are distinct from universal banks like your SBI, HDFC, ICICI, etc. They are infused as a niche segments. That niche banks typically target a specific market and tailor the bank's operations to this target market's preferences. So the concept of differentiated banks is not entirely new. In fact, and in a sense, the urban cooperative banks, the primary agricultural credit societies, regional rural banks, local area banks could be considered as a differentiated banks as they operate in localized areas. So in such category comes small finance banks and payment banks. But the present concept of differentiated banks can be said as first discussed in 2007. Thereafter, the concept was once again discussed in a paper of RBI in August 2013, and RBI granted in principle approvals to 11 entities to setting up payment banks in August 2015, and 10 for small finance bank in September 2015. So this is the background of small finance banks and the start of payment banks. Now we'll discuss in detail what are small finance banks. Small finance banks are niche banks that focus and serve the needs of a certain demographic segment of population. The objectives of setting up of small finance banks will be to further financial inclusion by the provision of savings vehicles, supply of credit to small business units, small and marginal farmers, micro and small industries, and other unorganized sectors entities through high technology, low cost operations. And this was the small finance banks was recommended by Nachiket More Committee on Financial Inclusion. Remember that fact. And the small finance bank shall primarily undertake basic banking activities of acceptance of deposits, lending to unserved and underserved sections, including small business units, small and marginal farmers, micro and small industries, and unorganized sector entities. And there will not be any restriction in the area of operations of small finance banks. So that is the basic idea about the small finance banks. Now we'll discuss what are the criteria for setting up small finance banks. The individuals or professions with 10 years of experience in finance, non-banking financial companies, microfinance companies, local area banks are eligible to set up small finance banks. The minimum paid up equity capital for small finance banks shall be of rupees 100 crore, and the promoters minimum initial contribution to be the paid up equity capital of such small finance bank shall at least be 40% and gradually brought down to 26% within 12 years from the date of commencement of business bank. And the foreign shareholding in small finance bank would be as per the FDI policy for private sector banks as amended from time to time. And small finance banks will be required to extend 75% of its adjusted net bank credit to sectors eligible for classification as priority sector lending by the Reserve Bank. And also the small finance banks have to maintain cash to reserve ratio and statutory liquidity ratio as per RBI norms, and at least 50% of its loan portfolio should constitute loans and advances of up to rupees 25 lakh. So these are the criteria for setting up small finance banks. Now we'll discuss what are the do's and don'ts of small finance banks. Do's and don'ts are clearly written here. The do's are they can sell forex to customers, they can sell mutual funds, insurance and pensions, and they can convert into a full-fledged bank. And what they cannot do, they cannot extend large loans, they cannot float subsidiaries and deal in sophisticated products. So that are the restrictions. And now guys, we'll discuss what are the challenges to small finance banks. There are many challenges for small finance banks. They have to compete with existing public sector banks and RRBs, that is regional rural banks. And the microfinance institution are specialized into micro lending operations with limited exposure to banking operations. That means they have to hire trained talent from the banking industry. So this is also a challenge, and the cost of deposit mobilization will be higher for these banks as they cover a rural and underserved segment. So these are the major challenges with regard to the small finance banks. Now there is another category of differentiated bank called payment banks. We'll discuss few points about payment banks also. So friends, the objectives of setting up of payment banks will be to further financial inclusion by providing small savings accounts, payments, remittance services to migrant labor workforce, low income households, small businesses, unorganized sectors, entities and other users. They will not lend to customers and will have to deploy their funds in government purpose and bank deposits. And if you see the scope of activities, they can accept demand deposit. However, payment banks will initially be restricted to holding a maximum balance of rupees 1 lakh per individual customer, and they can issue ATM and debit cards. However, they cannot issue credit cards, and payments and remittance service through various channels is possible, and business correspondence of another bank subject to Reserve Bank guidelines on business correspondence is also under their scope of activity, and distribution of non-risk sharing simple financial products like mutual fund units and insurance products, etc., can be undertaken by the payment banks. And the most important point is the payment bank cannot undertake lending activities. So these are the very basic idea about payment banks. And guys, this is a very important topic, the small finance bank and payment banks, both for your prelims and mains preparation. So please study about this in detail. Do not miss any fact regarding this topic, and we'll meet tomorrow with another topic. Thank you for watching this lesson.